Good morning, Laura. How are you today?
Good. You're Dave, right?
I am Dave, and Ken Parker is in the red shirt. He's our chairman. Glenn Sullivan is our agent that's been working with Solitude for many years. That will be the applicator. We have Dr. Mark Heilman is coming in now, so I'll be introducing people here. But I figured I wanted to talk to you first before I let everybody in. So this has changed from a small community meeting to, I believe, what might be a much larger meeting, which is totally fine. But I want to make sure that the people in the area that we're looking at kind of have first priority to answering questions, getting questions answered, because you're the priority. So I don't know your population nearly as well as you do. So if people are kind of chiming in and there's people from your community that want to speak, just please let me know and we'll make sure they're on. All right.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. All right, let me see, invite. Okay, so it is 10:01 and we'll admit everybody in. So Laura, I thought I'd do a brief presentation, just kind of an overview of our milfoil practices, what ProcellaCOR is, how it works, those types of things, just to get a base level of information out there. We do have a couple experts on the line that have more experience than we do that can chime in as needed. But the majority of the meeting is going to be you folks asking questions, having a conversation. Is that okay for you?
Sure.
I didn't hear the beginning, but
I'm sorry?
I didn't hear the beginning, Dave.
Sure. So, yeah. So I was just talking to Laura and saying that I think what would be useful for the group is to do, first I'll do an introduction from some folks on our side, and then I'll do a brief presentation, just kind of overall, what is milfoil, how are we managing it on Lake George, taking a look at ProcellaCOR, and then ending up with the treatment in Sheep Meadow Bay. And then after that, the majority of the meeting will be questions and answers, and we'll take as much time as you like. I'm open until 1:30 today, so as long as you're in line, we'll kick it around. So I believe we have, there's one more that are waiting.
Screen.
Okay. So people are probably going to be slowly kind of coming in. So I apologize if I'm a little jerky on the presentation. That's because I'm also the meeting moderator. So I have to let people in as they come. But why don't we get started right now? I first want to say thank you for everyone for taking the time to be here today. I know it's in the middle of a work day and a lot of you folks you have other lives, and this is something that got thrown at you. This is something that Laura Bibler had reached out to me and said, hey, can we get a better handle on what's happening up here? And it's always been the commission's goal to do so. So this is kind of one of those events that we're trying just to reach out and talk about what the project is, and more than anything, answer any questions that you might have, talk about the project. So to start out, I want to thank Laura for reaching out and helping me set this up. And also, I want to introduce a few people that are on the call that are kind of related to the Park Commission in one capacity or another. We have Ken Parker. Ken is the chairman of the Lake George Park Commission, took over for Bruce Young. Most of you folks knew Bruce. He was a longtime Hulett's resident. We also have two Hulett's residents as Board of Commissioners. One is Dave Floyd. Dave lives full-time in the town of Hulett's. And then Kathy LeBombard. Most of you folks know Kathy. Her family grew up and resided there forever. Kathy is out in California, so it's only 7 o'clock there, so she may be chiming in a couple of minutes later. Two other people I'd like to introduce are Glenn Sullivan. Glenn Sullivan is with Solitude Lake Management. Glenn has more experience doing ProcellaCOR and general lake management really throughout the Northeast than anybody I know. And he's a wealth of information on this. And Glenn has been working with us on this project and making sure that everything that we're doing conforms with federal and state program policy. And he's the one that helped us get together our application. So we thank Glenn for that. And lastly, on my current list is Dr. Mark Heilman. Dr. Mark Heilman is with CPRO. CPRO is a company that manufactures ProcellaCOR, and Mark was involved from day one in the product development and arguably knows more about how the process unfolded just in terms of taking an actual product, doing the scientific reviews, going through the federal government, going through the state government, and getting to where we have something that is acceptable for New York State. So while I have a limited amount of knowledge on that, I rely on people that really have been working in this field for years, and also our regulatory experts, neither of which could be on today because I only gave them a day's notice. But we've had them on in the past, and we have several of our meetings on our website where we've done these presentations. We just uploaded the Adirondack Park Agency presentation that was given last year on this very day, actually a year ago today, by Aaron Zeman, 111 slides. We will not subject you to 111 slides today. We're going to keep it relatively brief, maybe 18 or 20. We're going to try to get through that in about 10 or 12 minutes, but we want to make sure you have a full enough understanding of what the base reasoning for this is, what the product is, and what we're trying to do. So maybe that'll answer some of your questions up front, but we will be on this call until you guys are satisfied with all your questions, that they've at least been answered to our ability. So is there anything that you would like to open up with as our chairman?
Sure. I'd just like to say good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating. Remembering that the reason we're here is that the Park Commission, after studying ProcellaCOR for almost 2 years, following the studies, we weren't personally studying at that point. We were putting our trust in the United States government, and New York State DEC, and New York State Department of Health, et cetera. And as we processed last spring our decision to go forward with a couple of experimental applications, the Lake George Association got involved with us. And on a call very similar to this, almost a year ago, David and I made our presentation to the LGA, who immediately told us, and there was David and I on 2 squares of the screen and about 7 or 8 LGA folks there. So the crux of the conversation has highs and its lows. And so towards the end, I said to then Chairman Jeff Killeen, who unfortunately has passed since then, Jeff, what does LGA want to do, or what would LGA do if we did succumb to your request to postpone this? And he and others said, well, we'll throw all of our scientific resources behind this and study this and tell you what our findings are. And so we left that conversation and decided that we would continue with the process as we had done, completed all that, and we were confident that nothing else would be found scientifically. And that's proved to be true. The LGA subsequently filed an Article 78, not against the Park Commission, but against APA on the allegation that the APA should have had a public hearing. And there's actually a court hearing tomorrow morning in Warren County Supreme Court before Judge Mueller. Hopefully Judge Mueller will decide soon whether or not the allegation that the APA should or shouldn't or wasn't required to hold this public hearing. So having said all that, I just also will just leave you with the fact that our information over the last 11, 12 months is that our friends at the LGA have not done in-depth scientific study. Hopefully they've followed what is available to us. And I just have to somehow assure everyone that the scientific studies that have been completed are indeed that. They are scientific peer reviews. The product, everything that we've stated is what the product does or doesn't do, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, let us all get on with the meeting and with our questions.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So I think if it works for the group, I'll share my screen and we'll just jump into kind of an overview. I know a lot of folks on this call don't kind of live or breathe the world of invasive species management and ProcellaCOR specifically. So we'll try to highlight a few of these things and then we'll roll right into comments and questions. So let me see if I can do this here. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see what we have here. This is a beautiful picture of Hulett taken by Carl Heilman. I'm sure if you live in Hulett, you'll understand and see every one of these bays. Beautiful spot, my favorite spot on the lake. And there's been some confusion about the area of treatment because the bay that we're choosing has kind of a colloquial name that came across our radar as Sheep Meadow, but it doesn't seem to have an official name. It's north of Meadow Point, which is right here. And the bay that we're looking at is south of Agnes Island right in here. There's been some confusion because Sheep Meadow Lane is down over through here and Cook's Bay as well. And so it's not that area. As you'll see, the area that we're looking to treat is up here. This is Sheep Meadow Bay, as we call it. Again, I've had several conversations with some Hulett's folks. That may or may not be the proper long-term name, but that's what we've kind of been using it as. So it is not down in this area through here. So you folks that are certainly familiar with Hulett's, we have Sunset Bay, we have Indian Bay, and as you come up around the point, this is the area that we're looking at right in through here. So this is a picture actually from Sunset Bay a few years back, and this is ultimately what happens when we give milfoil room to breathe. It simply takes over certain areas of the lake and can form a monoculture and crowds out all native species. And this is what you end up with. And I have had the displeasure of swimming in many of these areas where it's actually physically dangerous to be swimming in some of these spots because your arms get all tangled up in the plants. And it's ecologically very detrimental to the native species. And certainly for recreation, motors, the props chop up the milfoil. And each of those individual fragments that gets chopped up can form a brand new plant in a different location. So that's always the challenge, right? So we've been talking about trying to manage milfoil before it gets to propeller depth. And we have ballpark 37 sites in Lake George that we manage right now, but there's over 200 known sites around Lake George and certain levels of growth. So just a little backstory, this map on the right shows the 37 areas that we harvested. I think this is the 2021 map. This is taken, some of the slides here are taken from last year's presentation. But as you can see up here in Hulett's, there are several sites that really have yielded quite a bit of challenge with Eurasian water milfoil. Eichlerville Bay, we had some work in Cook Bay. Certainly Sunset Bay has been an ongoing problem since 1989. And Sheep Meadow Bay going back into the mid-2000s. So there's been some discussion about, well, why are we switching over from the traditional methodology to this? And that's not a correct assessment of what we're looking to do. What we have is right now working with the Lake George Association jointly, we're going to be putting in about $450,000 just in suction harvesting alone this year. That doesn't include any work on ProcellaCOR for the 2 pilot bays. The Lake George Association is coming forward with $140,000, the Park Commission about $300,000 to $310,000. And we're going to continue that effort, particularly in the areas that respond well. And there are several areas that respond well that we can get a couple of years of efficacy. I've been doing this. I've been managing the milfoil program in Lake George as the director of this agency for 11 years now. And we have yet to eliminate a site of milfoil in Lake George using the traditional means. No matter how many years we go back and hit it and hit it again and hit it again, we've certainly reduced the numbers to where it's not a problem anymore, but it takes a lot of time and effort to do so. That is the methodology. And sometimes it lasts for a few years, and sometimes, as I'll show you in a minute, it doesn't last very long at all. So just in the last 5 years, as a ballpark, $2.1 million, that is not an insignificant amount of money. It is more than any other lake in New York State spends, hands down, on this treatment methodology. So it's fairly significant. This is how the process works. This is AE Commercial Diving. This is the company that you see out there on the lake with the orange balls and the suction harvesters. Down here, this is Wes Sheldon. He's one of the site supervisors for Lake George. And we oversee these guys once a week. We are in the water with them, taking a look at the quality of work to make sure they're getting the plants by the roots. They're doing everything they can. And we give these guys as high grades as we could give them because it's hard work and it's very taxing on the divers. and they take pride in what they do. And when they leave a bay, they try to get every single plant and fragment that they can, but it is very, very difficult to do so, especially in areas where we have a lot of native species, such as the Sunset Bay. So we plan on 4 suction harvesters coming in this year, and also a hand harvesting crew for some of those less dense beds. So please at least leave this conversation knowing that this is not a transition from hand and suction harvesting solely to ProcellaCOR. That has never been the intent, and that continues to not be the intent. Long-term progress, what are we looking at? So I've stated several years back that the goal is within 3 years, no remaining dense beds of milfoil to be in Lake George for the first time since it was started to be managed in 1986. And the fact is that we have done that, right? We have harvested and we have successfully removed all the milfoil in every dense bed in Lake George. The problem is that we've done it several times. We continue to have to go back and back and back. And so sometimes that kind of gets thrown back at me like, oh, what happened to your 3-year plan? And I say, we literally did it, and then it literally rebounded back, and now we have to do it again. That's some of our challenges. They return based on site conditions. Again, I'll go back because you guys know Sunset Bay. Sunset Bay is one of our most difficult bays because of all the natural limitations. When they get in there to harvest the milfoil, if they don't get all of those roots, that plant is going to grow back next year. If they leave any fragments, that fragment is going to create a new plant. If we have an area that is largely open bottom, i.e. Cook Bay responds very well. It is an open bottom with very little native vegetation. We went in there 2 years ago, harvested a dense patch in there. We went back last year and found almost nothing. So there would never be, based on the site conditions, a need to go in and do Cook Bay for any type of ProcellaCOR treatment because it responds well by the current methodology. But as a management agency, and the Park Commission is a management agency and a regulatory agency, if we don't consider all of the available methods, all of the tools in the toolbox, then we're not doing our job, right? And we are not breaking.
Oh, I got you plugged in.
So we are
Yeah.
hundreds of other treatments that have happened really throughout the Northeast and the country, and even here in New York State, there's been several.
Take your time.
In Warren County alone, we have seen several successful treatments. Glen Lake, Saratoga Lake, just to the south, Lake Sunnyside. We're going to be having a presentation from Warren County Soil and Water Conservation. Bob Bombard, who's a plant specialist, is going to be reviewing the Lake Sunnyside treatment. And Lake Sunnyside is an ideal situation to study because there are no inlets and no outlets. Whatever goes in Sunnyside will stay in Sunnyside. And you're gonna learn about the outcomes of that if you attend the presentation.
One debris out.
And then put up on our website. So let's go back to Sunset Bay, one of our challenging bays here in the town of Hulett. So this is September 2021. Every single plant that we could find or divers could find in Sunset Bay completely harvested. Now, we did a swim over at the end of the year. We might have found 1 or 2 stragglers, but they did an amazing job. Come back 2022, thousands and thousands of plants have rebounded within that bay. And this has happened since 1989, right? So looking back through the records, and most of the annual milfoil reports are on our website. The commission is nothing if not exceedingly transparent in everything that we do. You can take a look at this. This was the resulting outcome. And we said, this may not be the best methodology to use in Sunset Bay. And we're looking at the cost. Sunset Bay alone over the last even a decade is at least $500,000 just for one bay. And then we continue to come back each year. And also the ecological impact of us pulling up the roots in this 15-acre area right through here is significant. And we just did a study with SUNY Adirondack to identify what those ecological and water quality impacts are. And they can be significant. So that's something that we have to think when one doesn't have any impact and one does, we need to have a full understanding of those methodologies. So this is Sunset Bay by the math. Here's what we removed in 2018, did a little bit better. This is the 19 return, here's the 20 return, and then it came back up in 2021. Why is that the case? We talked to the dive crews, they don't know, we don't know, but it is hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in this bay. And this is just a 4-year snapshot, and this goes back for a couple of decades, very similar. So this is not a successful management strategy. So now we're going to talk very quickly about ProcellaCOR as an aquatic herbicide. I'm going to give you my level of knowledge, but we have more well-versed people on the call that can answer some questions later. It is a relatively new tool in the toolbox for Eurasian water milfoil management, approved by EPA in 2018, by New York State in 2019. This is one of the more impressive parts of ProcellaCOR. It goes in at a ridiculously low dose of 7 parts per billion. That equates to 1 drop in a swimming pool. If you had an eyedropper and you put 1 drop in your swimming pool, that is ultimately the dosage of what we're talking about. And by the way, only 2.7% of that drop is actual product. The other 97% is inert ingredients. And those ingredients have also been reviewed and approved by the EPA and the DEC independently, but since they're proprietary, they are not on the label. So we've had some questions as to what is the state and federal government hiding. That's simply how the system works, as it's proprietary, but it has been looked at as closely as the active ingredient itself. We'll talk about the no restrictions on drinking water or recreation fishing that exists in the ProcellaCOR profile. Very fast plant uptake and fast degradation, and almost no non-target impacts. This affects only plants that are called dicots. It's a very specific type of plant. Eurasian water milfoil is one of those, but also native milfoils is another. And that's some of the challenges that have been brought forward. Sheep Meadow Bay is only considered a class 3 wetland by APA because there was no native milfoil in there, which is a rare and threatened species in Lake George, or in New York State, even though it is everywhere in Lake George, but that gets deep down into the weeds. But this is kind of a quick summary of what ProcellaCOR is. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the regulatory review, just so you have a basic understanding. It was reviewed for use by EPA, approved in 2018. This follows, I believe, and Dr. Heilman can correct me, I believe it was 7 or 8 years of scientific study, review, and approval. Following that, the DEC said, well, we're not solely comfortable with the federal review. We're going to do our own review between Division of Health and also DEC Division of Wildlife. And a couple of informational points on the bottom. The application was fully reviewed regarding human health as well as ecosystem health. There were no objections to the registration. And a quote from Janine Brule from DEC: there are no data gaps in the science. If there were, we would never have approved this for use in New York State. We get all these questions coming up. Well, we need to do more science. And when we asked Janine, well, what specifically, if we had unlimited resources, what would we study? And she says, if we felt there was any more studies that needed to be done, we would not have approved this in New York State. The DEC does not see any need for additional study on this product based on the thorough reviews that have been done by the federal and state governments. As a quick citation from the Department of Health, you can read the first part. Ultimately, due to a complete lack of toxic effects for fluoroperoxyfen benzyl, the US EPA did not cut dietary occupational risk for the labeled use of ProcellaCOR. So they found absolutely no toxic effects for this, and that continues on. Here's the Vermont State Toxicologist statement, basically saying a daily exposure to a 0 to 1 year old. Basically, the health water drinking water advisory is 3,429 parts per billion. That's the drinking water health advisory. Now, in contrast, we're putting this in the lake at 7 parts per billion, right? So that is more than 400 times higher than a baby could drink it out of a baby's bottle. So when we're looking at this and the holistic nature of really, has this been evaluated and is it seen as safe for drinking water? And this is Vermont. The same thing is done with Maine, Connecticut, New York State, and 49 out of 49 states that have looked at this have all done the same thing and come to the same conclusions. One step further, let's take a look at the European review. European Food Safety Authority's no observable adverse effects level. An average 150-pound adult would have to drink 232,000 gallons of ProcellaCOR treated water per day over a 90-day period just to reach the no observable adverse effects level. So that's a pretty strong statement. It's, of course, physically impossible to drink 200,000 gallons of water per day for 90 days, but this is what the European Food Safety Authority has come out and said. And if you take a look on our website, if you're interested in this and going down the rabbit hole on science, Canada has a 300-page document that has 364 citations, all scientifically based, saying these are the things that we've reviewed, and here's our assessment, and here's our recommendation for approval. So that's the science side of it. Now let's go to the practical side of it. Where has this been used? It's often been said recently that Lake George is so special and so unique. It's never been used in a large water supply before. Certainly nothing as complex as Lake George, and that's factually inaccurate. So we've been reaching out to everybody in the Northeast and several throughout the country to say, let's learn about this. We want to make sure this is fairly bulletproof before we even consider it for Lake George. We've had the great benefit of having counsel from Amy Smagula, who is the New Hampshire invasive species specialist for that state, is responsible for overseeing every application of ProcellaCOR in New Hampshire, including Lake Winnipesaukee. So Lake Winnipesaukee, in terms of size, is 46,000 acres. So about almost 2 times the size of Lake George at 28,000 acres. So, and if you've ever been to Winnipesaukee, it is an extremely complex lake with more bays and fingers and arms than Lake George has. It's a tricky lake. And so what they have found, several of their bays have been struggling with Eurasian milfoil infestations for years, which is why the EPA and the state of New Hampshire collaborated in 2016 to say, we want you guys to be a pilot site in 2016 to test and see how this would work. And this is actually in a public water supply as a pilot site for EPA back in 2016. So it is a drinking water supply for the city of Laconia, 17,000 people. Here are the treatment areas, and here's the water intake down through here. Tested across the bay and at the intake, zero detection outside of the treatment zones. And these are the treatment zones, zero detection outside of these very small areas up through here. And this isn't the Park Commission. This isn't an agent of ours. This is the top person in New Hampshire talking with no dog in the fight about their treatments in Lake Winnipesaukee, to which they've done, I believe, more than 12 of these now independently, all very successful. These are Amy's own individual points out of a presentation that she gave to our board. Outstanding milfoil control within 3 to 4 weeks, no significant impacts on native aquatic plants, quick decline herbicide in the water column, no post-treatment algae blooms, HABs or otherwise, following treatment or milfoil die-off. And many sites, very importantly, many sites are seeing treatment of 3+ years of control with much lower dosages than traditional herbicides, actually a magnitude less. So if we're going back in the Wayback Machine, a sonar was put in parts per million. This is put in at parts per billion, 1,000 times less dosage than the previous generation of aquatic herbicides. And at the end of the day, absolutely excellent milfoil control. Now let's bring it closer to home. Minerva Lake was the first ProcellaCOR treatment, first and only so far, ProcellaCOR treatment in the Adirondack Park. Minerva Lake is about an 80-acre lake, and the gray area in the middle here was all completely dense Eurasian water milfoil. And they had been working to harvest and manage milfoil for almost a decade, putting $70,000 a year into this treatment, hand harvesting and suction harvesting, hand harvesting and suction harvesting, repeatedly, every single year, maxing out at $70,000 per year. So the town said, we want to look at something a little bit different, because the town owns a good portion of that lakeshore because it's the recreation area. And they decided on ProcellaCOR. They went through the process with DEC. They went through the process with APA, which was a unanimous approval from the APA board, by the way, and they did the application. And what they found was within 3 days' time, it was absolutely non-detectable. The concentration rate at application was 3.8 parts per billion, and it was gone. So here's the graphs from each of these individual sites. And this is required by the regulatory permits. The sampling is absolutely required, and they tell you where. So here are the sites that they looked at. And by 6/8, by the time they did this treatment, there was no detectable presence of ProcellaCOR. And interestingly enough, they treated 40 out of 80 acres of the lake, and yet as it diluted across the water column, because the inlet's on the left and the outlet's on the right, as it diluted its way across the water column, it was even effective at lower concentrations, and it killed every single milfoil plant in Minerva Lake for the first time in history. And 2 years later, they only found one plant that has come back. This is out of millions of plants in Minerva Lake, and they were fighting at it for years and years. Now, they did this treatment for $27,000. So, and it's guaranteed to last a minimum of 3 years. So in 3 years, the town of Minerva would have spent $210,000 and would continue to do this repeatedly. And by one treatment of ProcellaCOR at 10% of the cost, milfoil is a thing of the past in Minerva Lake. So this is what was presented to our board by the folks by Lee Walrath at the Adirondack Park Agency, and actually the town supervisor of the town of Minerva. that said, you know, this is a game changer for us. I'm taking that extra money and I'm putting it into my roads, my bridges, my parks. This is a pretty good deal for us. We've had zero negative impacts, and we feel pretty good about it.
Dave, can I, on those two examples you gave, has monitoring data, that one, for example. One issue that the Lake George Association has been raising is the depth at which the application is made.
Yeah.
And that it does not degrade as quickly at depth. And they had a number like 111 days to degrade at depth. Can you, I don't know exactly how to ask the question, but
Sure. No, I get your point. We've seen those same outreach materials. I'm going to actually ask either Glenn or Mark to kind of highlight some of those, the breakdowns in the deep water part of it. I know just enough to be dangerous, but those guys know more about it.
Hey, Dave, yeah, I'd be happy to comment further on that. Yes, ProcellaCOR is broken down primarily via ultraviolet photolysis in the surface water. So it will, in deeper water where photolysis does not occur, it is degraded more slowly. But that is not the only mechanism by which ProcellaCOR degrades. So there are bacterial metabolic processes that will more gradually degrade the herbicide. Actually, these can be relatively fast in standard EPA testing, 2 to 6 days as a general rule of thumb. And so again, I think it's factually accurate that degradation of any trace ProcellaCOR that reaches deeper water, it will be present, but there are degradation processes beyond the hydrolysis that was cited at 111 days. There are other processes that will occur that are making the herbicide of low persistence in the environment, even in deeper water.
do you know in Winnipesaukee and Minerva, did they do any monitoring at depth where the photolysis could not occur?
I'm not sure what monitoring throughout the whole water column might have occurred. Some sites are just not vertically stratified, as you would see in Lake George. So there's generally vertical mixing through most of the water column in a site like Minerva Lake. Glenn may clarify anything on some of those projects, but you know, there have been treatments of ProcellaCOR in deeper water, as deep or deeper than Lake George. The one that I can remember off the top of my head is Hayden Lake in Idaho, which has a mean depth of 100 feet. That's well in excess of Lake George's 70 feet. And there were no concerns, no issues documented around use of ProcellaCOR in that site.
What depth are you going to be treating in Sheep Meadow Bay?
Sheep Meadow Bay, I think our average is around 10 feet. So, you know, our application will probably range from 4 to 5 feet up to a high of maybe 12 to 14 in those ranges.
Okay. And what is the depth of photolysis? How far does that go?
That's going to depend on the clarity of Lake George, but I would imagine that you're getting good clarity down to 20 plus feet in Lake George.
So photolysis will still reach to 10 feet?
I would certainly expect that, yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you, sir. So continuing on, so here's the conclusions from Minerva Lake treatment. This is from the Adirondack Park Agency.
Yeah, before we move on from that, would you mind sharing those studies that on lakes that are deeper so that we can see the impact of how the water would flow out to 30 plus feet deep right off of Sheep Meadows Bay there?
Yeah, I actually have an email into Amy Smugula from New Hampshire this morning. I can ask her those specific questions. I'd have to rely on Glenn or Mark for some of those other more specific things.
Yeah, the answer given wasn't 100% clear there. So more info there would be great.
Sure. Okay, absolutely. This is a couple of these slides are from the Adirondack Park Agency because they're the ones that reviewed the post-treatment. Water milfoil was cleared over the entire 79-acre water body, not just the 41-acre treatment area. Only one plant was found a year after treatment, 18 months after treatment. That was outside the treatment area. No plants were found inside the treatment area. No evidence of adverse impact to native plant communities. Subtle changes did occur, and those subtle changes resulted in all of the lack of milfoil in that area. The native plants came back and repopulated those sites, and the herbicide concentrations declined as predicted. We also have successes here just in Warren County and Saratoga County, Glen Lake, Lake Sunnyside, which again we'll be hearing about at our board meeting on February 28th, and that is a public meeting for anybody. And then Saratoga Lake as well. And there's several more of these things out there. So just general, this is meant to be not all inclusive of everything that's happening. This is just a synopsis, a snapshot. Okay, so I just have a couple quick slides on Sheep Meadow Bay. Again, we've gotten some pushback on what the name of that bay is. And ultimately, if the name of the bay is something that we don't understand, then please let us know. That's just what came to us as that name because it doesn't have an official New York State name on the record. So Agnes Island is up top right here, and then Sheep Meadow Bay. If you ever spend any time down through here, this is fairly infested with Eurasian water milfoil. The commission sought for about 8 years to address some of these challenges. It did respond well, then came back. Responded, came back, and then the commission tried benthic barriers, which are plastic mats on the bottom, and then removed those. The plants populated those areas, and then there's still actually benthic mats in that site that were never removed after the fact. And we're going to, after treatment, we plan on removing those mats and bringing it back to a natural bottom for the first time in probably 2 decades. So 3.6 acres. This is what we're looking at for treatment in Sheep Meadow Bay. At a concentration of 7.7 parts per billion, which again equates to 1 drop in a swimming pool. And this is from last year. Planning on treating.
Dave, could I ask you to back up 1 sec? Can you show with your pointer where those mats are currently located?
The mats, yep, and the mats are right here. Yep. So if you're swimming off of this large house over here, you'll see the densest part of the bed is right about here. And then there's a section of bedrock right here that slides into the water. It starts right at the bedrock and goes right into the lake.
Thanks.
Yep. So 7.72 parts per billion. And that's going to be done. This was slated for last year, of course, but there was the injunction put in by the court based on the petition. And we're looking to do the same thing this year. Total volume of herbicide out of this entire area right here is 4.78 gallons, which would be injected below the surface right at the top of the plant level, which is within the reach, within that general hashed area. So, as you know, we're required by law and by DEC practice to do dilution modeling. And so that's why we contracted with Solitude Lake Management. Glenn is a certified lake manager in New York State and has done arguably more ProcellaCOR treatments than anyone else in the Northeast of the country. And so he was the person that we wanted to come on board and work with us on this project. This is the generally state mandated effort. This is the APA, DEC mandated. They actually added a few more sampling points because Lake George is such a spotlight on it, and we happily agreed to that. And so this is kind of a map that Glenn developed using the DEC's established model, which is extremely conservative because when Glenn does the modeling, he's taking it over what the average depth in that area is. But as you can see, the depths drop off significantly. So the idea that this product will be dispersed largely throughout the areas, number one, those models don't account for dilution plant uptake. And 2, it doesn't account for the extremely conservative nature of the model where you're assuming this whole red area is where it says 10, 11 feet, 12 feet, that this whole dilution area is that same depth. And what we're looking at is it goes out 32, 33, 35 feet, 3 times the depth of the treatment area. So the chance of that being able to dilute across that much larger area is really physically impossible. So this is, again, a very quick synopsis. If you're interested in this topic, we do have the full 111 slide Adirondack Park Agency presentation on our website. And that is much more comprehensive. It goes into these things. Today isn't about giving you max information. It's about answering your questions and talking about the projects and your concerns. So that is all I had for kind of a quick overview. I'll stop sharing the screen and we'll get back to it. And then Laura, since you're the one that kind of got us started down this path, I would open it to you first, and then we'll just kind of go through as best we can. So I can't see everybody, but Laura, do you want to start us off?
I have a couple real practical questions for you, Dave.
Sure.
The window that we were given in the notice says that the treatment would take place between May 17th and June 30th. Would the residents be given prior notice, narrowing that? And is there a reason the window needs to be big? And also, can that, in your scheduling, it seems like a lot of the opposition, some of the opposition that I've read to it has to do with actually, using the water, bathing, etc., being in the water. It seems like maybe you wouldn't have that opposition if it were a little earlier. Is it possible to do it even if it were next April or whatever, just not at a time when people would be swimming? So the very practical questions there.
Absolutely. And it's a very important question. So the goal is to, I'll answer and then I'm going to ask Glenn to jump in. The goal is to make sure it's that sweet spot between when the plants are actually up in the water column, because it's a systemic herbicide. If the plants aren't up, it doesn't do anything, right? So we have to find that balance where throughout the year, the plants are growing up. And remember, water milfoil comes up before any other plants really in Lake George. So we have this unique opportunity to avoid any non-target impacts because those plants aren't even up yet, and get that treatment done in that bell curve between when the plants are up and before people show up. Not because there's public health impacts from drinking, but just because people are concerned about it, right? So we want to find that spot. And Glenn, I believe, had scheduled June 15 as our ballpark timeframe for last year. What we don't want to do is go too early before all of the plants are up that are going to come up. If we treat when only 80% of the plants are up and we miss 20% of those plants, that will be deemed a failure of the project, and then we would most likely not come back to it. So we have to do it right. So that's the number one priority. And doing it later is more concerning to the public, because more people come back around 4th of July weekend. We want to get it done before then. So I believe that sweet spot, and Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, was right around mid-June. So remember, Lake George is a cold water body. You can do it earlier in Minerva Lake because it's much warmer, much earlier in Glen Lake because it's much warmer. We have to wait a little bit longer in Lake George because the plants take a little bit longer to come up. So we're aware of all these factors. So Glenn, maybe I'll kick it over to you for some of your thoughts.
Yeah, Dave, you're absolutely right. We certainly do want to hit the sweet spot. When I look at filing the application though, and I put a window in there for the application, I'm thinking about that, but I'm also thinking about the amount of time it takes to get an approved permit. And that can shift by 30 days just based on the timing of an APA meeting. So I want to go to essentially what I think might be the earliest possible time to what I think would probably be the latest ideal time. And that's why it's a big range like that. Now, once we move through the process, there'll be a minimum of a 7-day notice about when we're going to do it. Ideally, it'll be even longer than that. It depends on when we get permit approval. So if there's a very early permit approval, we might be able to give you 3-4 weeks notice. If that permit approval for some reason goes into the May or the June meeting date, then that approval or that notification might only be 7 days. But either way, you'll know at least 7 days in advance.
And Glenn, how would that notice be distributed?
Well, we have to notify DEC and the APA by regulation 7 days in advance, but then we'll also notify the Park Commission, the association, the town as well.
So just a suggestion here. I know you have
Sure.
all your regulations you need to go through. It might be a little easier because there's such a limited number of people in that bay, if you had our emails or our text numbers, because by the time we get the notice, it's long gone. These notices take forever to get to us. Some of us, we don't live there. So
Sure.
Anyway,
have an email
practically
list.
speaking, if you just emailed us, it would be easier, or texted us, and when I'm sure if it happens and so forth, just a suggestion.
If you have an email list, I'd be happy to do that. Sure.
Okay, great. My sister, who had to leave the call, also had a question. She wanted to know, why aren't you doing this in Sunset Bay if it's so bad, if Sunset Bay is so bad?
Yeah, so Sunset Bay was seen as a little more, it's larger, it's more impacted, it's more visible, it has more homeowners. We're very honest about the way we've kind of selected these sites. Number one, Blair's Bay has been just the most intractable site in Lake George. So that's up in Glen Burnie. So that was a clear, we have to do this one. And what we wanted to do is have a comparative analysis. We wanted to say, all right, we did this treatment here, we did this treatment here. How did they both respond? And if we see any differences, what were the resulting reasons for those differences? And Sheep Meadow Bay was one that the commission had said, this is something that we can't continue to fund because we have other more high priority areas in the lake that are getting chopped up by boats all the time. Sheep Meadow Bay is off the beaten path, right? It also has fairly few residents. So the fact that we had not a lot of people in that bay, we have an intractable site that's been very difficult, and it's very specific and very dense, abundant growth in that area, which other ones that we've managed for years have been picked through, and they're more sparse and scattered. So this is as robust of a bed as we're going to see in Lake George. So looking at that bed, since we haven't managed it now in 8 years, it is solid, big green growth. And if ProcellaCOR can tackle that and eliminate that, there's no other bed that we know of in Lake George that would not respond as well. So those were kind of the reasons behind picking Sheep Meadow Bay as a site.
Hey, that kind of begs the question of why wasn't it treated or harvested since, I think, 2014? Do I have the
8
date right?
years is what I heard.
And just wondering why it's been so long. And also, if I know you swim it, has there been any count of what's actually there recently? I'm not using the right word. Have you done an assessment or survey, whatever the right word is that you use to actually count the number of milfoil that are present like right now? I've seen the 2014, but times have changed, right?
Yeah, so if you look at the old numbers, so if you see that, I think I sent you the APA slide nugget that showed, back from our annual reports, it was harvested, it came back a little bit, harvested, then it regrew, came back, and every year seemed to increase in those numbers, right? That's when the commission started with the benthic barriers, which turned out to be a moderate disaster because there's always money to put barriers in. There's not always money to take them back out. And since I've been here at the commission 11 years, we've taken out over 1,000 legacy leftover milfoil barriers out of Lake George that were always set and forgotten, and it's been a challenge for us. Either way, as of 2014, we took a look at the site, we looked at the history, and we looked at its risk to Lake George, most importantly, and saying, is this a site that is going to be high risk at spread throughout the general area, like a Harris Bay or a Long Island or a village of Lake George? How many boats are going through this site that are chewing it up and spitting it out everywhere else, like so many of our sites are doing? And it was judged to be a low traffic area, and one that when we're evaluating the amount of financial resources that we have to hit all of these sites, which ones are most damaging to the overall ecology and recreational use of Lake George? And this one came down lower in the system, saying, all right, we can't continue to fund this site when, number one, it doesn't really have a big public health impact or a big public recreational impact. We need to go over now and we need to hit Long Island, because all boats going in and out of the DEC registration site has spread that milfoil all the way up and down Long Island now. And that is a seedbed for Harris Bay, which is one of our biggest sites in Lake George. So when we're planning these things in the beginning of the year, talking to our contractor and saying, which ones are we hitting and which ones are we not, because we have limited resources, that bay fell off the list.
And I would chime in if I could from Sunset Bay, that if they didn't want it over there, we'd be doing backflips to get it over in our bay, because we know how bad it is. I swim it almost every day, and your points about the props with one of the few boat launches in the Northern Basin on weekends, the amount of chewed up milfoil that flowed into my dock every day is I end up taking it out with rakes every day in my dock. it seems like a great test area, like you're saying, which is a great scientific, yeah, that's the way you do things scientifically with drugs, with chemicals. And you test it over there. If it works, great. To use it on a bigger bay like ours, I think I can clearly speak for the majority of our homeowners, because I've gone door to door, and a clear majority, probably 90%, are totally in favor of it. The other 10% I haven't heard negative, but I'm just saying the majority of people in our bay are all for it. So just get that.
What bay are you in? I'm sorry, what bay are you in?
Sunset
Sir?
Bay.
Sunset Bay.
I'm in Sunset Bay as well.
Yep.
Which
And
is actually Pickerel Bay, right?
Yep.
It's Pickerel Bay.
Yep.
And I just
I'm
want to
sorry,
make
I didn't
this
get your name
point.
again.
My name is Megan Ash. I'm an Ash.
Are you do you own property on Sunset Bay and property?
Yes, we do.
You're a member of the association.
Yes.
You don't own lakefront. You are a member of the association, but I'm just.
Yeah,
to
I have
be
a dog
clear,
slip
have
and I
spoken-
swim
I've spoken
there.
to
I just
all
want to
the
make a
property
point.
Owners, the property owners, I've spoken to them. You are a lakefront property.
Actually,
owner.
I texted all my, I just so you know, I texted all my neighbors and they
Association members.
were
Yep.
vehemently opposed to the use of, just so you know, I can show you the text if you like.
And
And I would like
I'll
to
show
say
you. I'll
something.
show you my list of property
Okay,
owners who actually own lakefront.
Could I just have a turn to say
Yep.
something?
Sure, talk
please?
all you want. Talk
Okay.
yourself out.
Going back to Dave's slides, you guys were curious as to why the drop off in 2020 when you hand harvested the milfoil. I would assume that has something to do with people not traveling due to COVID in 2020. And I would like to make the point that I have personally gone out and done water tests for the last several years around Hulett's Landing, Pickerel Bay, Sunset Bay, the Washington County Beach, the leach field at the golf course. And every time I go and take these water tests in, they come back sometimes so high the machines can't even read the parts per million or billion because they're too high. Some of the streams are running at 15,000 parts per million or billion, whatever it is, which is obviously a clear health hazard. So I think what people are failing to realize or pay attention to is that you're so concerned about the eradication and the growth of the milfoil. It's likely due to the fact that we have antiquated, outdated wastewater systems that are dumping nitrogen and phosphorus into our lake and feeding the growth of the milfoil. And I feel like, personally speaking, that the Lake George Park Commission is doing very little to address these issues. So as a resident of Sunset Bay with a dock slip attached to the deed for our house, who swims in Sunset Bay, Pickerel Bay all the time, I can assure you that the reason the milfoil is growing back so quickly over here after you hand harvest it is because there's so much sewage being dumped into the lake.
Absolutely. You're 1,000%
And
correct.
nobody's addressing that. We're just like, okay, let's just treat everything with a chemical herbicide and everything's going to be fine. No, everything's not going to be fine. What we're failing to do as a group, and I feel like targeting the LGA, saying that they're running an opposition campaign. I took that personally because it was a group of residents here that went to the town meeting the other night. We contacted each other, we encouraged each other. We were the ones who showed up to the meeting. It wasn't the LGA pushing us, we were pushing the LGA. So I take personal offense that somehow the LGA is running an opposition campaign to the Lake George Park Commission. You guys are both supposed to be protecting our water, and they are the only ones that seem concerned about the fact that we have antiquated septic systems that are running off so much wastewater into our lake that nobody's paying attention to it. Yeah, we're talking about checking everybody's septic systems every 3 years. That's not good enough. I have a holding tank. I pay to have my holding tank pumped out every 6 weeks. And I'm not a rich person up here, but I pay to do that because I don't want my sewer going into the lake.
Megan, you're 1,000% correct, but it's two different issues.
I see our chairman has his hand up. Ken, can you provide some thoughts?
Well, I appreciate Megan's inspections that she's done, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to ask a question. Are you aware of the 2-year septic system mandatory inspection program that is currently in the process of being activated, and it is in effect law.
I am aware of it, but to me,
But
it
yeah,
feels like we're 10 years behind the curve here.
Megan,
Yeah.
my position is very simple. You made the statement that the Park Commission is doing nothing about the
I said
septic
it feels
systems
like
around
it feels like you're doing nothing because you're so focused on the milfoil, which is not even listed as an invasive aquatic species according to the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. It's not even listed as an invasive species on your own website for the Department of Environmental Conservation. So we're so focused on this milfoil, but we're not focused on. Yes, I get the 2-year inspections, but what's that going to do when you find that all these
Megan,
systems are falling apart and failing?
Perhaps, the town of Dresden might be a better place to vent this concern. They would have.
I already did. But
Jurisdictional
you guys are
authority.
the
I
Park
know
Commission. You guys are the scientists, right? You keep
the
putting
town
out
of
these emails
Queensbury,
saying you're the scientists. So I want to hear from the scientists
but
about why there's so much wastewater going into our lake and you guys are focused on milfoil. When likely the wastewater is encouraging the milfoil growth.
Megan, what do you think should be done?
I'm sorry, what's that?
We've already answered that question by working very hard for 2 years to develop a law that's appropriate, that will require all septic systems within the prescribed area around the lake to be inspected.
Yeah, but where's the teeth? Where's the teeth in the inspection process? Once you find out that they're all failing, what happens after that?
They're required to be brought up to code, which usually includes a replacement.
Right. So we've got all these multi-million-dollar homes on the lake that have 100-year-old septic systems, and we're going to have to pace them out over the course of several years for inspection.
5
and in
years.
the meantime, right. So we're talking a long-term fix to an immediate problem.
The bottom line on that is this is something that should have been done 30 years ago.
Yes.
And it wasn't. So we can argue about that all day long.
Yep.
The fact is that it is now 2023. It is in effect. We are in the process of doing it. We can't do all 2,700 in 1 year. It's physically impossible, weather-wise.
But you guys are saying you're spending $500,000 per year just in Sunset Bay alone to hand harvest milfoil. It's like, didn't you say that, Dave, in your presentation?
You're talking about two things.
So Sunset Bay over the past decade has been ballpark, that amount of money. Yeah.
So, but I would suggest that if you went back to your slides and you showed where you eradicated it in 2021 and in 2022, it was right back to where it was, from a year prior. That is because of all of the septic systems up here that are failing.
Well, I guess I would argue differently, but I don't want to hijack the meeting. There's a lot of people on the call here.
Dave,
I
I'll
wasn't
just
trying to
say,
hijack the meeting. I was just trying to voice my opinion, which I thought this was what this was for.
yes,
It is.
and certainly you
I just wanna make
voiced
sure
your
plenty of
opinion,
people
and
have
that's
the chance
welcome.
to speak. We can come back.
Yeah, as a resident of Sunset Bay, Pickerel Bay, with a home on the bay, I do see the effects of milfoil. I see more and more of it in front of my area. I've got about 186 feet of frontage, and every year I see continued milfoil growth. You go out into the center of the bay, and it's tough to even swim through there. So, I applaud LGPC's commitment to transparency, to taking the time like this to really explain the science behind this, where else it's been done. I was not aware. I think you said Lake Winnipesaukee. That's good to know. And certainly to Megan, 100% right on the degradation of the lake due to aging septic systems. LGPC has done, as well as some of the municipalities on the lake, a lot to go after this, but it's not simply a magic wand wave that they have the ability to tell everybody to upgrade their septic system. I think what's in place now is a reasonable approach to addressing that. And hopefully more homeowners are as committed and as passionate as you are, and will take it upon themselves to remedy aging septic tank systems.
That's the kicker. They're not. I mean, we've got people around here who haven't cleaned out their septic systems in 10 years. My own neighbors that I love and care for. They don't They're not educated on the matter.
The county should discover that in the next 3 years as they sample them, and I
Yeah.
welcome the opportunity and can't wait for them to come check everyone's in our bay. And I hope they find everyone. And if there was a chemical that you could put in the bay to get rid of the septic issues, that would be a different conversation. But I'm excited as can be that Washington County is going to take the effort, and it can't happen overnight because, you know, it's a big project and it's a different issue, but we got to work on both of them together.
So can I ask something about Jelliff Night Bay? I mean, Sheep's Meadow Bay, which is kind of a distance away from Sheep's Meadow.
Yep.
My question was around why there, why now, what's the rush? I mean, my background in evolutionary ecology studies usually go in years and not in months. By months, I mean 2 years is still a matter of months. I've swam in that bay. I've snorkeled in the bay for 25 years. I've snorkeled in other bays for 25 years that are public land that are suitable and look similar also. The milfoil in the bay in the last 25 years has obviously been better when it was harvested. It's at a better point than it's been in a long time, even though nothing's been done for since 2014. I snorkeled the whole thing just last year. And especially since there are public land areas where it'd be less community concern. We have renters that would have concern of it. Even if it's fine and it comes out to be fine, that doesn't help to pay the bills if renters are just concerned about something, and we could point them to science, but that's not going to help. I don't understand why specifically in these places where there were specifically people that didn't want it, that only heard about it about 3 months before it was going to happen on a note that had a map on the back that was a squiggle drawn that we didn't even know what bay it was when we got it. Couldn't tell at all. And then finally, when I found it and went to the main application, which was thorough and long through, the maps on there were incredibly, I mean, I wouldn't have confused that for anything. It was almost as if it was just trying to slide in there in the last 3 months. And I don't get that. But if there's other places around the lake that work well, I mean, yes, it does go deep. The water moves quickly through there. Lots of boats every day. I don't know where the count came from, but I sit and watch them in and out in circles, and then sit there on the side. And I know that's the same in other places, but why here? Why now? Why not wait a few years? See how the similar lakes respond. You gave a lot of ponds and a couple of lakes, and the couple of lakes were only the last couple of years. Dave, I think I heard you say at one point you compared the lake to being similar to theirs as gravity in China being the same as gravity here, which isn't quite a scientific comparison. I see efficacious limnology studies to be over the course of years. Anyway, why here? Why now? Why not in spots that are going to have less concern of citizens?
Yeah, so I think I answered part of that before. So Sheep Meadow Bay has fewer residents than almost any other infected area than we have. It's got kind of what we're looking for. I mentioned the robustness of the milfoil bed there. I would disagree politely about the fact of that milfoil growth in there. I've swam that bay now for 11 years each year, and especially over the last 2 years, I've been in there many times snorkeling from end to end. And I believe that bay, the reason it hasn't expanded as wildly as some of our other ones have is because it doesn't have the prop cutting up that others do. So if looking at all of the sites that we're typically managing, if you're going to be going to Harris Bay or we're in Warner Bay or off of Long Island or Northwest Bay, those are much more heavily recreated and anchored than what we're looking at here for Sheep Meadow Bay. So all of those factors, we kind of settled on those two sites. It's the smaller one out of the Blair's Bay or this one. But again, we were trying to simply get a comparative analysis and say, these are mostly the same, but a little bit different. And let's see how the ProcellaCOR responds in these two individual bays. And that's where we ended up. And the reason that we're ready to do it now is based on the vast amount of outreach and research that we've done to say, do you think Lake George is ready for this? And I was hoping that Amy Smagula from New Hampshire could come on the line and talk more about it, because she's gone through this now for the last 6 years and said, we're we are so confident in the effectiveness and the lack of impact on this. This is the only thing that we're using anymore. And it's just incredibly effective. And people in Winnipesaukee, from her experience, they moved on from any concerns because it's been a known commodity. This is what happens. The sampling continues to show zero resulting ProcellaCOR or its metabolites in those areas. And it just seems to work. It worked effectively. So everywhere else but us has done larger treatments. Every single place that we can is a larger treatment than the 2 individual pilot bays that we're looking at right here. So this is the smallest foray into ProcellaCOR that I've been able to identify on one of the larger lakes. So it's a very modest entry into that. And we also have the ability to look at this a little bit more closely than most. So if there's anything else that we could study as a result of this, we're going to certainly do that as well.
Dave, this is Paul Knight. My family owns houses on Meadow Point, and I have cousins in that bay that we're talking about. I have a kind of a question and a comment. The comment is one of the most compelling facts, if you will, about ProcellaCOR that I've heard, I don't think I've heard you mention today, and that is that it's not actually a toxic chemical, it's a plant hormone. Have I got that right?
Correct.
Which I think accounts for why such a small amount can be so effective against these plants and not affect a lot of other non-target plants and people. I also just wanted to ask, I think you said that Mark might be able to say how many years ProcellaCOR was studied before it was approved? Because one of the things that the LGA said was that there was this startlingly little information about or data about it. And from what I gather, that's not the case. Mark?
Yeah, Paul, the initial research, actually the very first screening of this chemistry and its development was back in the late 2000s. We began work on the aquatic herbicide evaluations as early as 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a 7+ year journey of additional research and regulatory studies until US EPA federal registration. That's just general clarification of the timing. And then your description about ProcellaCOR as a plant hormone. Essentially, yes, it's simulating aspects of the plant's own hormonal responses that control growth, and it creates a disruption in growth that is plant specific, and that's why the toxicological profile relative to non-plant organisms is favorable, because this is a chemistry designed under modern research processes that was focused on plant response, and therefore is very specific to those processes that only occur in plants.
Thank you. I have a lot of sympathy for anybody who would be unnerved by putting anything into the lake, because our culture is just full of dramatic examples where health authorities or environmental authorities said something was fine right up until the moment when it wasn't. And nobody ever made a heart-wrenching movie about the EPA said something was safe and it turned out it was.
That's right.
That happens all the time, right? But that's not what the movie Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo is. They said it was safe and it wasn't, and that's where people died. And so I really get the kind of reaction and the concern and the emotion associated with this. I appreciate what you're doing to try to bring all the facts to life and be to light and be transparent about this. And I really understand how this can be a contentious issue. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Paul. I see Michael has his hand up.
Yeah, hi, Dave. Mike McGinnis. I'm probably one of the 3 homeowners that are directly in the impact zone. I'm not sure who else is on the call. And we actually talked last year twice. You have my email, you have my phone.
Yep.
Yet I still have not received any notification about this, and I only get information from my neighbors, which I find very disturbing in many levels. The fact that there's 3 houses in this bay that are directly impacted in this impact zone, that there can't be direct notification to me on when this is going to happen and why.
Yeah, I apologize.
We talked about it last year, so it's the same thing over again. So
Yeah.
I don't understand why that's happening again after we personally talked about it.
And
Yeah.
to add to that, actually, from the previous year when we had the notice a few months ahead, which most people didn't get because they had wrong addresses or the lake address and such. But it also specifically says in the application that there was going to be permission asked to use our docks that are marked on those things, of which it came within 3 weeks of when that was going to happen. And there was still nobody talking to anybody. I mean, I know we're talking about 2 separate things here, the science of the issue. And that actually begs another question. I was wondering, who paid for the science? Who paid for the research? And has there been other entities to research that? Or is it mainly just Sempro themselves paying for the research? I do understand that the DEC and APA have accepted things and gone through. But the concern that a few other agencies would like to do further research. Sorry, it was 2 questions. So it was following up on the notification of the directly impacted residents, but also about the breadth of the research, not the amount of it, but the breadth in terms of different entities.
Well, to add to that, the timing of the notifications, obviously the last one came out, I believe it was January 21st. And, you know, on the notification says you have 21 days to object or you're giving your consent no matter what. So we haven't received it. We had to object based on our neighbor sending it to us just because we don't have all the information. Having a public forum like this would have been great before we had a say in it. So right now you have no say whatsoever if you object to this. So everybody on this call that didn't get this letter, you have no say whatsoever objecting right now because you didn't do it within 21 days of that letter being sent to you. So that, to me, why don't we have a public forum with LGPC and LGA and have the debate and have it with the homeowners that are being directly affected? Why hasn't that happened in 2 years? So why don't we get a public debate going that, you know, I don't want to have a call with the owners of the chemical and the company that's getting paid the most to put the chemical in the lake. So where is the opposition to this scientific research? Like, where's the debate in this research? I don't see it in terms of a public forum. I see a one-sided, campaign by the LGPC. We're saying it's the LGA. I feel it's the other way around, directly towards us, of misleading us and not giving the direct people that are involved in this a say. So everybody else, I'm glad Sunset Bay is chiming in, but they're not putting it right in front of your dock, in a couple of months where your kids swim every day. So, I'm glad you're chiming in now, but we haven't even had a say. This is the only say I've had in 2 years about this matter.
So, yeah, Mike, I do recall a conversation back maybe a year ago. The database that we pull from is the Essex or the Washington County tax database, right? So when we work with Glenn to develop that database as required by state law through the DEC policy and program, it is whatever is on the tax database. If your property is listed with whatever address you have, that is exactly where it went. I can't speak to why that might be different. If there's new hands change, if something happened, or Glenn, perhaps you could speak to this because you're kind of managing that part of it.
I emailed you and Glenn last year after we had the same conversation and said, this is the address you should use. It's the PO box in Hulett's Landing. It's not that hard to find.
Yeah.
So you'd think one of the 3 people that are directly in this, there would be a level of like confirmation that this letter was received somehow, or a phone call or an email or anything really.
Or even stop by the places. As you said, there's very few houses there. It would have taken about half an hour to walk around that bay, especially if you're going to need our docks. And what if we didn't give permission? That's going to ruin the research afterward, because it came within 3 weeks of last year's about to happen. And that might have been a problem, but yeah, I mean, half an hour walk around the bay, knock on a door, and you probably get most people. Not every part of the year, but the year before, when I saw some stuff going on out there, I thought that was a mechanical removal of milfoil starting up again. I had no idea it was research for a chemical being put in. I mean, it's The transparency issue, I know it's separate from the science, but it doesn't help garner a lot of confidence, especially with, like you said there, I would love to see the opposing sides in a single meeting discussing these things. I've read a soundbite here and a soundbite there, and I've read hyperbole here and hyperbole there. How about in one place? That would be really helpful.
I would second that.
You emailed me last night. I have this email right here from you, Dave, saying that you were basically planning this meeting for an informational Q&A for the Sheep Meadow Bay residents. And Mike was texting me at the same time saying he hadn't even heard about this meeting at all. So, and yeah, I know Mike and Jillian really well. I get that you're being the most impacted, but you know, we're all concerned about the effects on the whole of the lake. I mean, I feel bad for Mike and Jillian because you're basically showing this map like right in front of their house. And I would just like to bring up something else. You guys are saying this is not a chemical, this is not a toxic chemical, that this is a hormone. Apparently, according to the Adirondack Council, who publicly commented last year, the EPA considers this a Group 4 herbicide, and it was registered by New York State as a restricted use pesticide in 2019. And it is a chemical. The chemical is called Arla. It's spelled ARYLPICOLINATE. So some PhDs would, you know, argue against the fact that you guys are calling this non-toxic. They're saying it's a restricted use pesticide in the state of New York.
But that doesn't mean it's toxic.
I'll comment on that for Megan. Perfect clarity. This is an EPA registered pesticide. There's no discussion on that. How it works is similar to natural plant hormones. But this is a synthetic chemistry. So total clarity on that, you know, from our perspective, you know, please, I'm not trying to create any confusion. This is an EPA registered pesticide, an aquatic approved herbicide. And therefore, yes, the overall toxicity profile of that chemistry has been characterized. Aeropicolinate is the family of chemistry to which it belongs. So I want to recognize that so there's no confusion for anybody on the call. You know, how it works, how it's designed to work in simulating a plant hormone, a plant specific process. That was what I was trying to clarify.
Well, I appreciate that, but I do have a question on that.
Sorry, Megan, I don't want to cut you off, but I'd appreciate if someone can answer my question of can we have a public debate with the Park Commission and LGA before this is approved, or is that something that's off the table already?
Well, we have a court case tomorrow that's going to be down in the judge's chambers where most of these issues are going to be litigated much more formally than what we're talking about today. But again,
the APA and more procedurally than environmentally, right?
Yeah, and we've been more than open. You know, we have one of our folks on the line, one of our commissioners, Kathy Munsell, who's been talking back and forth with the Lake George Association. I see we have Chris Nowitzki on the line here from the Lake George Association. And if we wanted to set up, if people wanted to set up a general community Zoom and have this type of discussion more broadly, we'd be happy to do that. Absolutely.
Hey, Mike, this is Elizabeth. I did attend a meeting like that last year, and I got the information from the LGA. I'm a lake protector. I became part of that organization just so I could get information about this kind of stuff. So I don't know how you got missed, and I was the one that sent you this Zoom link meeting.
I'm aware. That's the only reason I know
Laura
about
asked
it.
me to make sure I
Yeah.
out to you. So I'm not quite sure how you're out of the loop on this, but there have been some meetings, and that was very informative, and it was good to know. But I know it got, delayed, and so there's more to come for this year, but I know they did it last year. So at least, I mean, there has been some information.
Yeah, and it was part of it last year, and last year was the same scenario where they sent the letters, and if you don't object in time, it doesn't matter what you say in the public forum anymore. So it's kind of like a nice to have after the fact.
The
really.
timing is a little tricky.
Yeah, so and I get it, that that's, I would say that's probably what we're the most upset about. And then secondarily is some of the studies some of the wording is a little vague, and some of the wording that both sides use are misleading, to be honest. So that's kind of why I'd rather have everybody in the same room and let's hash it out. And you know, my biggest concern is actually the depth of the lake. And the studies that are there, and even on the maps that you're showing, is, you know, we're 20 feet right off our dock. You know, we go a little bit further out, you're 30 feet pretty quickly right there. So, you know, even further out past Agnes Island, it drops to 90 feet pretty quickly. So I don't, you know, I'd love to see some studies on the depths of, you know, Winnipesaukee and where they were. It does look like they were in shallow bays, but do they drop off as quickly as Agnes does? You know, there's a pretty big shelf right there. How long does that study last for? Is, you know, I haven't seen any study that's longer than 5 years old in anything in terms of water or public health that's in use right now. So those are my concerns. Obviously, being right in the middle of it and one of the only houses that's going to have to swim in it every day makes it a little bit more more concerning for us, I guess.
Okay. I appreciate your comments, Mike. If we can do me one more favor and email me your address again, and I will find out what the discrepancy is between that and the Washington County tax maps, and we will try to get a concerted, more accurate update. So just as an example, I sent out the 2,000 emails yesterday, and at least 300 came back undelivered. And these are emails that are given to us by homeowners. Our ability to keep up with actual addresses is non-existent. We rely on the county tax maps to say this is where people are receiving their mail. Wherever the tax bill goes is what we have on record. So I have no idea what happened in your particular situation, but knowing that we don't have easy access to people's emails. Right when Laura contacted me, I said, could you do me the favor and get this out to your community, because we don't have that simple ability outside of a hard copy mailing based on a year-old county tax database. So this is helpful to us. So we will do better on finding out what those, if we're missing any of those addresses or they're incorrect, we will try to correct those today. So yeah, we'll try to do better with that.
So-
Thanks, Amelia. Yep.
Hey, Dave,
I have
can I
a-
just clarify the address issue? I go into the county database to collect the block lot information, and then from there, I generally will go to the town to get the actual addresses. So that's the procedure.
And Glenn, you were on the email that I sent last year with my correct address. So, I mean, I guess maybe we forgot about that conversation. So I'll resend it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if you guys are talking about.
Like we had your,
We didn't have it before.
we
I
didn't have your
tried.
email.
Yeah.
Well,
I
that's.
appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Phoebe, I asked somebody to please forward it to you because I didn't have it. Anyway, can I get back to a question I asked Dave before? I just want to clarify this. Dave has swum sheep meadow, scuba and done an informal count, if I'm hearing that right, Dave. We haven't had an official count since 2014. Is that correct? Or is there more data out there that we haven't seen?
So the counts originally, the numbers that you're looking at came from our first aquatic manager who we contracted with, and that was Lycott Environmental, and he was hand harvesting, and he would literally count each individual plant that he pulled up. Lycott was only around for 2 years. When I got here, they moved on. Then we got Aquatic Invasives Management, and they do it by bag count and then by weight. And then after that, we now have a commercial diving that does very similar. We don't have an ability to count in place how many plants are out there now. It's impossible to do. So we have.
Well, do we have any data since 2014 is, I guess, what I'm asking. And the reason I'm asking is because I've heard different descriptions from the houses that are affected about how much milfoil is actually there. And that's why I'm asking. Just want the facts, that's all.
Sure. Of what milfoil is there right now?
Yes.
Yep, we have aquatic plant surveys that are on our website that show the diversity of plants that are at both treatment sites. And you'll see each dot is represented as a different plant or a different series of plants based on the sample points. What is probably not going to show is specifically the outline of that milfoil bed, but that's very similar to what is going to be the treatment area. Sometimes the treatment area goes a little bit outside the bed because of stragglers. But we don't have a specific there are 26,000 plants in that bay. We have no ability to do that unless it was physically, each one was hand harvested, which hasn't been done since the late 2000s.
Is this what you're talking about? This,
Whose is that? That might be.
That's the Lake George Association.
I guess, I'm not sure where it was emailed to me, but I'm just trying to find out if there's, I'll look on your website again, is your answer. And that's current for what's happening now.
So I can say that picture is not of that bay, though. There's a picture of a bay and there's a picture of somebody
Yes,
holding.
I understand, but,
Oh, okay.
but the dots are along our docks in that bay. I don't know what the key means. They're yellow and they're red. There's no key to it, at least, I mean, because this was cut and paste. So I don't know. I don't know what the source is. I'm just trying to find out where we could see that information, I guess, Dave.
Yeah, so all of the application materials since last year have been on our website. If you scroll down to ProcellaCOR, there's a button that says application materials. That has everything that we've provided to the DEC and APA that's required to say, here is the known plant community, both native and invasive. Here's the extent of that. Here's the dilution model that was run by Solitude to say, here's where we expect that product to go before it's broken down and diluted, and all the other information. So that's been on our website for over a year. We hadn't done any additional update to that. We had no idea how the court case was going to go, nor is there any requirement by any government agency to say, because you held off for a year, now you need to do another plant survey. But
So Dave, that's current as of what year, I guess, what's what I'm asking.
so that was a 2021 plant survey.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah, so look on it, you'll see it. It was done by Warren County Soil and Water Conservation. It's comprehensive. And even in the electronic version, you can flip through it and it shows you exactly what plants are where.
If you go through the application, it shows you all the plants and where they are. And that kind of segues into my last question. Is part of why there was Sheep Meadow Bay was selected was because it has one of the healthiest plant community ecosystems in Lake George. Based on the surveys, it has, I think, the 13 or so different plant species that are right in front of our dock, with very little milfoil. So I'm wondering if it's being used as a test site to make sure the other plants don't die, not just because of the milfoil there.
Nope, that's not the case. And I don't know Sheep Meadow Bay to be one of the most ecologically diverse sites in Lake George. If we're going to go with that route, we would definitely do Sunset Bay, which has a vast amount more native plants than Sheep Meadow Bay does by a long shot. And then those are the sites that simply have solely milfoil, and it's every range in between. That was never a factor in any decision making on choosing that bay.
So only because it has less people in it. That was the main reason we're given.
Well, I mean, I've said it a couple times now. It's a robust plant community, right? So that is probably the largest plant community that we have in terms of how large the plants are. It is removed from the general prop wash, so we know that this isn't something that's going to be originally spread. And yeah, it's a lesser population. It's off the beaten path. And instead of dealing with 160 owners in Harris Bay, we're theoretically, Mike, we're working with.
You're only having to deal with 3. Look at that.
We're only hitting 3 out of 5.
That doesn't seem kind of wrong when you say that.
We're hopefully getting better.
All right. That's it for me. Thank you.
Bibi, I see your hand up.
Hi, thank you.
I do have a quick question.
Richard, I was speaking.
Bibi first, and then we'll get to you, Richard.
Yeah, I was starting. Thanks. So my concern has to do with, Laura asked the question earlier about the timing. So if this does get approved and goes forward, and you put the ProcellaCOR in the water, my rental season starts around June 15th, which means, and we pump water directly out of the lake for drinking water. And I've got 5 houses on the other side of Meadow Point from where Sheep Meadow Bay is. So my concern is, what's the timing? Do I have to make sure my tenants wait to use the water for 3 or 4 days? Or, what's the process after the application to make sure that people are safe to drinking the water and using the water? And will it be impacted on the other side of the point? Because it's a big, peninsula. So I'm not sure if it's going to travel around or But we have a pump that's right into the boathouse bay, which is where Laura's dock is. So it's not that far away from where you're going to be putting this in.
Yeah.
I'm just, my concern is circulation and timing and quality and for drinking water especially.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I understand your concerns. I'll start and then I'll ask Glenn to jump in. With regard to drinking water, there are absolutely 0 drinking water restrictions. You can drink it right after you apply it, but I know that doesn't satisfy the group on the call here today. But going up around Meadow Point to the far side, Glenn had run the dilution models as required by DEC with the conservative nature of that. I don't believe, Glenn, that it made it around Meadow Point. I'd have to take a look at the application. Now, Glenn, can you speak a little bit more to the issue that BB's talking about?
Yeah, Dave, you're correct. It didn't make it around Meadow Point. Maybe the way we do this is we'll start sampling immediately after treatment, about an hour to 2 after treatment, and we'll sample it roughly 2 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours. And these samples will go to the lab, we'll get them back. That takes about, well, anywhere from, I would say, 5 to 8 days to get those results back. So during that time, the people that are in the treatment area and that are in that dilution zone, all right, should be respecting the irrigation restrictions. Right. Again, as Dave said, there's no drinking water restrictions. You're okay to drink the water, but if you were to use that water and you wanted to water your flowers or your garden or something, you should be respecting that irrigation restriction until we can report back that the concentrations are below that 1 part per billion threshold. And that's, that even though that they'll drop to that point probably by the 3-day sampling. By the time we collect that sample, get it to the lab, get a result back, it's generally going to be in that 5 to 8 days for that period.
And where's the sampling taking place from?
There's samples. I don't know if Dave, you can scroll back to that screen, but there's samples in the treatment area and on the outer perimeter of the dilution zone. There you go, down.
I believe there's one right in Boathouse Bay.
Yeah, there you go.
SM3.
Yeah, those are the 6 sites that we'll be sampling.
It's excellent.
And how do you access those?
By boat?
Is that by boat?
Yeah, we'll be out on a boat to do that.
Oh, okay. I thought the application said that the boat was a problem that was required to use the docks.
SM3 is actually right on top of BB's intake.
Yeah, that's my pump. Yeah, so that's my concern.
You'll have a very accurate reading.
You're joking, Kathy.
I got a quick question concerning the studies done, if I may. I'm assuming that there have been studies on health impact on animals, more specifically people. And it sounds as though it's benign, but there are some issues for wanting to read that for myself, if for peace of mind, if for nothing else. Is there a reference that we have that I can review the data on health studies?
Mark, you're probably the most well-versed on this one.
I'm sorry, say again?
Mark's going to give you.
Yes, there are publicly available documents, I believe, through both US EPA and New York State DEC. I'm not sure what's posted on the Park Commission website relative to the project, but I can certainly work with Dave to make sure that the right documents are there for that.
Yeah,
that would be great.
With that, may I ask a quick question and then I'll be done asking questions? We're talking about people and animals. Have you guys considered the effect on the endangered bald eagle, the Endangered Species Act, and the bald eagle nests that are literally within like 100 to maybe 200 yards of where you guys are planning to use this herbicide, which is considered a pesticide in the state of New York? Can anybody speak to that? Have you guys talked to the federal, authorities about using this around bald eagle's nest and their young babies?
Yeah, Mark can probably speak to the lack of bioaccumulation up the food chain. So Mark, you want to kind of hit some of that?
I mean, were you guys aware that there's an eagle's nest like right in the area, and that eagles feed out of Sheep Meadow Bay?
Yeah, it's not just eagles, it's mergansers, it's ducks, it's
But,
everything.
but the bald eagle specifically has special protected status as an endangered species through the,
Right.
through the, you know.
Right, but the
federal
process
government.
is the same, right? It's going up the food chain, which is really what is looked at for the science. So Mark, you
Well,
want
it's not really about the food chain, it's about the law. It's about not being able to disturb their ecosystem or their environment with things like poison. You cannot disturb their feeding grounds, their breeding grounds, their nesting grounds. You can't do those things. So I was just curious if you guys had taken that into consideration when you guys were applying for this application in Sheep Meadow Bay.
Mark, you want to take a first crack at that?
Oh, well, yes, there are ecological risk assessments relative to bird species that would capture potential direct risks to eagles. As Dave commented on, there's a scientific assessment of bioaccumulation processes and any risks there. Relative to the permitting processes, specifically in Lake George, relative to a species like eagles, I would shift that over to Dave to touch base on the exact processes. But I know that DEC on any permit like this would be reviewing the potential risk to non-target organisms, and certainly eagles or other endangered threatened species would be part of that review.
Well, that seems funny because it seems like it would be part of the review that you guys would have already done, considering you're talking about doing this in just a couple months.
Well, I can say that ProcellaCOR has been used in habitats with eagles all around the country without any adverse effects. So, but specific to Lake George in this permitting process, again, I'd have to punt that over to the commission to.
I think you'd actually have to punt it over to the Department of the Interior, and I contacted them this morning, as well as Region 5 for the DEC, to let them know that there is potential conflict here with the bald eagle population that eats and fishes out of Sheep Meadow Bay, just so you guys know. It's a federal issue. It's a federal issue.
I'm sorry, Glenn, I had the past question I never finished. You said you were gonna resample, collect the samples by boat, but it said that there was issues with hull contamination, and so, but that's how the follow-up is being done in the bay.
Yeah, so we'll sample the outer edges of the dilution zone first before we go in and sample the treatment areas. That way we're not, if there's typically where there would be a higher concentration in the treatment area itself. So we'll sample those after we sample the outer edges.
All being done by boat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, no land.
I have to put a boat in anyway to get the sample site from out in the out at number 4 in the middle of the dilution zone. So it just makes sense logically to sample them all by boat. I don't have a problem if we prefer to sample by docks, if people want to make docks available, but at this point, I'll probably just use the boat.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Would we be allowed to, or will you cordon off the area when treatment is being applied, and also when the tests are being done? For the residents as well as for people who are visiting?
We wouldn't be cordoning it off, but we will be very aware of anybody that's coming into the water during the treatment, and we'll stop the treatment and talk to them before we proceed with that. As far as the monitoring goes, it's not going to be, that's not going to matter. We'll just be out there on a boat scooping some water up, so we won't matter if somebody's out there in the boat with us or in the lake with us.
Also, what does this do to the plants? When we were mentioning irrigation, what's the downside of turning on your irrigation then?
I'd rather let Mark answer that because he'll give you a more descriptive answer. Mark, are you available?
Yes. I guess, do you want to elaborate on the irrigation question? Make sure I can thoroughly.
What is the risk to vegetation if the irrigation was going?
Overall, very low, but the label requirements and any permitting requirements are designed to be conservative relative to creating some potential stress to a limited number of landscape plants, usually dicot broadleaf plants.
Oh, if they're dicots, then of course.
Yes, turf
Okay.
grass is quite tolerant to the herbicide. There are certain dicot herbaceous plants that could have some sensitivity. In general, the recommendations and guidelines that are on the label are quite conservative. But that's why
That
they're
answers my question. Got it.
permanent conditions. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so urban vegetable gardens could be affected during that time period.
Yes, they would be herbaceous plants. They would be in a category of plants that we would recommend not be irrigated per the label guidelines. Yep.
So that's for a period of 5 days after the application, right? Once you test the water and then send it off for analysis? You said it would be about 5 days after that?
5 to something.
I would say at a minimum 5 days, somewhere between 5 and 8 is likely when I expect that irrigation restriction to be removed.
And then again, how would we be notified after that?
I think we definitely need notice.
Yeah,
We need the all clear.
lawn, yeah. And Laura has a lawn and gardens and.
We do copious amount of vegetable and herb watering at that time, especially if it's a droughty June.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So how would we be notified? Do we have to pursue that ourselves, or will we get a notice via email or a letter or something?
Again, if there's an email list, I'm happy to send an email out for that.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we can start with the one we have here, and I guess, I don't know who else needs to be on it.
Glenn, what is your email? We can all email you.
That's fine. Yeah, my email is gsullivan
gsullivan
at solitudelake.com.
at solitudelake.com.
Yes.
Okay, great. I've got one more question for you, Dave. What's plan B here? What happens if this treatment is either postponed or for some reason, denied? It's not going to happen. Then what happens to our Sheep Meadow Bay? What's the plan? Is there one?
No, not right now. We haven't gone to a plan B. It hasn't been managed since 2014. We'd probably do a reassessment and see if this was going to be one of those bays that got high enough in the priority list in terms of risk sites to Greater Lake George that it would merit funding for that. I can't speak right now whether it would or not. So I don't have a good answer for you at this point.
Risk sites to Lake George, which would include the current, count, the explosion of milfoil, how much milfoil is there, as well as other things, the boat traffic coming in and out, that type of thing, right?
Correct. Right. Yeah, that's
And the
generally
way that it might spread to other areas.
right. That's one of the largest factors. Example is Long Island started out as a very small site. We thought it was going to be moderate in its growth because it's very rocky substrate. And last year it was one of our biggest milfoil sites because we let it go for a couple of years. And it just exploded because there's so many boats in and out of there, and it's been a challenge for us. Or by contrast, Sheep Meadow Bay has largely been self-contained. I keep an eye on it every year, and while it's growing and expanding, it's only doing so based on the root growth. It doesn't seem to have a lot of prop damage that fragments it and it goes everywhere else like a Blair's Bay might.
Okay, thanks for that answer. It's illuminating.
We actually, on our end, we need to sign off, but I don't know if, can I make a motion to adjourn?
We're here as long as anybody wants to be. If people need to drop off, that's certainly fine. Yeah, so does anybody else have any current questions? My email address, I am accessible all the time, cell phone, email, call anytime. If, I apologize again to the McGinnises that if we drop the ball, that's certainly on us, and we will do our best to make it right. If I could again impose upon you to send me your email address, we will change the county system as best we can and try to get it to you. emails are fantastic. If we can do that, that's great. And we can do this as soon as tomorrow again. If you have new people that want this information, it is our goal to be as transparent as possible and have the right people on the line to answer these things. We've had experts from other states. We've had the DEC top expert in pesticides, all these people to talk about these things. So we're fairly well versed, generally to the community level of concern. But if something comes up, you have a follow-up question, I can forward it to the right party and try to get you a better answer.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you, Laura, for setting this up. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thank you for the action.
Dave, I noticed it's being recorded. Is that going to be on your website, or how would people get at that recording if they wanted to listen?
So why don't I, when I'm done, I'll talk to our IT guy. It usually takes us about 48 hours to post-process it. I'll stick it right on our ProcellaCOR site. As you scroll down on our ProcellaCOR, I may as well share my screen and show you. It's right in front of me. So if you go, this is our, this is the Park Commission homepage. You click Lake George Park Commission, smack in the middle of the homepage is ProcellaCOR info. You scroll down, you'll see my Look TV interview, our frequently asked questions. Here's our science and approvals. I'll put it somewhere around the Look TV interview. We'll say, hey, community meeting. And then this video will be there for anybody if they want to kind of follow up on it. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. Any final, stop sharing here. Any final questions from anyone on the line?
I have one more for you, Dave.
Yep.
As far as if this gets approved and if this happens, the milfoil dies, right? I falls to the bottom of the lake. Has there been any studies about what dead milfoil does to the quality of the lake or the other species that may need to grow or nest or feed in that
Absolutely.
area? Because you're gonna have a lot of dead weeds down there.
Yeah, no, that's one of the main talking points that people have been kind of bringing up. The fact that currently the status is that let's say it's an acre, just for easy numbers, that acre of milfoil grows in the beginning of the year. It's a perennial plant, grows up to its max height and dies off every single year. It's been doing that ever since that bed was there. By contrast, when we're treating milfoil for this, we're doing it at a time when milfoil is going to be between 10 and 20% of its biomass in that area. We want all the plants up, but we don't need we don't need to do it in August when everything is there, right? So that's the ideal time that we're doing it. And my understanding, and Mark and Glenn can confirm, the die-off of that plant is not instantaneous, right? It takes 2 to 3 weeks for that plant to senesce and die back. Then ultimately that plant would break down just exactly the same as it does every single year, with 80% more biomass every single year, right? So let's say we're treating at 20% of the biomass in June, and that biomass dies off. That is going to release a certain amount of nutrients back into the water column at 1/5 of the volume that happens every single year in that same bay. And when we do it that one time, we do not expect a return of this bed for a minimum of 3 years. And in some areas, according to the New Hampshire folks we've been talking to, they've treated 6 years ago, it still has not come back. So that is the gain. So, you know, my frustration, here's my final soapbox. We've been playing defense on this issue really since there was some umbrage taken to it by outside parties. And we shouldn't be. This should be an absolute win for those people that are interested in bringing the ecology back to Lake George like it naturally should exist, in a way that is cost effective and has zero public health effects. That should be the story on the cover of the magazine, saying we found a breakthrough way to address milfoil in Lake George to make it a thing of the past. This should be a success story, and yet we're playing defense on it. And I understand why, because people are very concerned about these types of things, and we're trying to be as open and transparent as we can. But I spoke last thing here, where if you Google ProcellaCOR, it automatically comes up to Lake George, of course. I got a call from a graduate school professor out in Oklahoma that had been following our issue, and they have the water supply for their university comes out of this shallow lake that was completely taken over by a yellow floating heart. And they were having huge problems with water quality, water clarity, and everything because of the die-off of that plant. They treated that entire lake with ProcellaCOR. Only 5% of it remained, and those were in the untreated areas that were too shallow. And, you know, originally everybody objected to it. He says, with that the water treatment system has been less bogged down. The clarity is amazing. You look at this beautiful lake. We have brought this lake back with one season of treatment. And he says, now people are coming and saying, why didn't we do this before? This is the most successful thing that we have ever seen with no public health impacts. This is the drinking water supply for a college university. So that when he brought that to me, I had no idea. I'm like, that's a great success story. And, we've been trying to highlight these different things. This should be a win for Lake George. And I think we need to change that mindset. And we're trying to do it by 2 very small demonstration projects. Do it, take a look at them more closely than anybody else is going to take a look at a ProcellaCOR treatment and then determine if it's the right thing to move forward for Lake George. I'm hoping 3 to 5 years from now, people are going to look back and say, this was the right move. And if it's not the right move, then we're not going to do it.
Hopefully I won't have 6 fingers and extra feet in 5 or 6 years from now either, because that's also what people are concerned about, is that there hasn't been enough longitudinal study to suggest that, yeah, it is safe. You guys keep saying it's safe, it's safe, it's safe. I personally worked on a Superfund site against the APA for years. They kept telling us it was safe, and then all my friends and family started dying of blood cancer and brain cancer. So, to keep being told it's safe, it's safe, it's safe, when really it's only been on the market for a couple of years. And yeah, there may be some peer-reviewed research out there, but most of it's coming from the maker of the product. To say over and over that it's safe and we're going to be clamoring for this, I think that's the issue most of us are having, is that we are probably willing to let this happen. It's just that we would like more information about the long-term effects. And we don't feel like there is enough scientific information, no matter how much you guys tell us there is out there, because it's been such a short-term use product. I think that's the biggest concern most of the residents around here have, is that we're being told it's safe, just accept that it's safe. But really, it takes sometimes years for these things to appear in the environment that you later find out these things are not safe. And I think that's what our biggest concern is.
Right. And most of what you're speaking of tend to be the contaminants that linger in the environment for many, many years. And this one simply does not. So I know I'm not going to convince you on the science of anything. The commission has to believe that the science that has been approved by the federal and state governments and countries across the world, and every state in the country that we have right here, have at some point had a level of confidence to say this is the right thing to do, to give it a try. That's what we are. That's what the commission is.
That's what they said about the Manhattan Project material when they were incinerating it in my parents' hometown. The plutonium that they were incinerating illegally in my parents' hometown, they said it was safe, and it wasn't. And I think it's not that you're not going to convince me of the science. It's just that you're telling me that the EPA that actually removed clean air and clean water protections is the one that is basically telling us this is safe. That's the EPA that we're talking about from 2018, 2019. They actually went in and removed clean air and clean water protections from their regulations. So, it changes with every administration. So I'm hearing that, it's the EPA that didn't want to protect our water or our air that's advocating for the use of this herbicide or pesticide, whatever it may be. And it's not that you're not going to convince me of the science. It's just that I have lived through a hellish experience watching people die of brain cancer and blood cancer after the EPA convinced people around a Superfund site that everything was fine, everything was safe, everything was okay. And some of those people include my friends and my family. So yeah, I'm a little impassioned about having people tell me that the EPA says it's safe, so just accept it at face value, and I don't.
Okay, fair enough. Any other final questions from the group?
I just wanted to echo your words. I'd love to see the headline that it's the wonder cure for the lake. We'd all love to see the milfoil gone, and love to see it done safely and seen well. And so I just want to finish with echoing what Michael said earlier about loving to see a debate around the people who are currently have concerns in a scientific community in that basis, because I only read one side in a newspaper, another side in a newspaper, and I'm not able to ask a question except for with citizens and with people who are already supporting it and who did the research themselves, but nobody else with a question. So it would be really nice to have that dialogue where if I asked a question not knowing as much as some of the other people, if the other people that have an issue with the scientific community don't show up, that tells volumes. That says that they don't have something to say, something legitimate to bring to the table. But yeah, I'd just like to see a broader discussion. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your honest answers, everybody. It's appreciated.
Thank you
Thanks.
for your courtesy, everybody.
Okay, absolutely. Please, again, reach out to me at any time and we can always follow up, but we appreciate your time this morning. Have a good day.
You as well. Thank you.
Dave.
Megan, let's work together on septic.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. I'll give 110% because that's a huge issue and I want to talk to you about it.
Okay, where are you in Sunset Bay?
Up and over the hill. I talked to your husband last week. I'll stop by next week.
Okay, I'll be here.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Take
Bye-bye.
care, everybody.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thank you.